The other big thing happening in science right now is that an increasing amount of evidence is coming out that indicates that evolution takes place far more rapidly than we think. Charles Darwin, when he came up with his theory of evolution, assumed that the evolutionary process takes millions and millions of years. It was called gradualism, the approach that Darwin took. Now, Darwin took the approach of gradualism because he was influenced by geologists like Lyell. And in fact, in building a new layer geologically of stone, what was once living stuff and turning it into stone, takes millions of years. And it's only if you assume a very gradual process that you can see how there's an evolutionary process behind these layers and layers of stone that we see when we start cutting into mountains in order to build railroad tracks, which was a major help to geology at the beginning of the 19th century, the time of the folks, the geologists who influenced Charles Darwin. Lyell was the big influence. And so Charles Darwin assumed that little bit by little bit by little bit by little microscopic bit, the evolutionary process piles up until it creates new species. But we're discovering that, in fact, speciation seems to take place far more rapidly than we think. Well, guess what? I wrote an article in 2003 called Instant Evolution. And I assembled a whole bunch of evidence, mostly from insects, that evolution takes place much more rapidly than we think. Why is that relevant to human beings? Because human beings have spent 10,000 years in cities. We invented the first city over 10,000 years ago, Jericho, when we invented the first walls and circling a big territory with defensive walls, and then a bunch of tribes could come in and live side by side, and then instead of dividing up into tribes, they could divide up into subcultures, and the bead makers could live in one part of the town, which they did in towns like Çatalhöyük in Turkey, and the priests could live in another part of town, which they did in Çatalhöyük. People could segregate according to interests. Well, once people segregate according to interests, subcultures choose different standards of beauty. What's beautiful to a goth is not what's beautiful to a punk. What's beautiful to a punk is not what's beautiful to a preppy. Each of those three groups chooses very different standards of beauty. Well, guess what different standards of beauty do to evolution, to genes? If men compete like crazy to get the most beautiful girl in their group and to impregnate her, and they avoid the girls they consider ugly in the group, then the characteristics of the girl with the genes that are considered pretty and the guy who's considered gorgeous are going to dominate in the next generation and the generation beyond that. And over the course of a relatively small amount of time, different groups will begin to look different from each other. Much as we hate to admit it, black people have a different color than white people. Arabs have a different color and a different facial and skull characteristics than white Anglo-Saxon Protestants or Jewish people like you and me. Arabs are our closest ancestors on the planet Earth genetically, at least so far as we know. And yet here you and I are looking so distinctly different that when an Arab guy walks into the tea lounge and sits next to me on the couch, which one did yesterday, I can tell he's an Arab immediately. I can tell he's not one of us. Now, telling who's us is hard because we tend to blend in with white Anglo-Saxon Protestant populations somehow. At least I think we do. White Anglo-Saxon Protestants might disagree with me. But at any rate, we take off in different directions as subgroups based on beauty and sexual attraction and random definitions of beauty. Now, guess what? This isn't unique to human beings. You would think this is unique to human beings, but no. Fashion, group consensus on what's beauty, influencing genes, who gets to pass their genes along, it's in guppies. Lee Dugotkin has done experiments with guppies in which he makes it look as if a bunch of female guppies if you're a female guppy, he introduces you, and it looks like you're surrounded by other female guppies, and it looks like there's a male guppy who is abnormally orange on the other side of a barrier, and it looks as if all the other females are just dying to get with this bright orange, abnormally orange male. Well, guess what influence that has on you? If you see an abnormally orange male, you want him. You want those abnormally orange genes to go shooting through your, whatever it is, ovipositor, your eggs, the next generation that you give birth to. That can have a fairly rapid influence on genes. In fact, if you've got, according to another friend of mine, Kelly, I forget Kelly's last name, Kelly Cassane, spiders. If you're a male spider, getting sex isn't easy.
Really?
Yeah, just like if you're a male human. And you have to go through an elaborate courtship ritual to impress girls. And only if you do it really superbly are you going to get any nookie, to use an ancient term. And so, but the spiders on one side of a lake will gradually evolve a different dance, a different mating dance, than the spider or the spiders in a lake 1,000 miles away, even though it's the same species, will evolve a different dance that appeals to the ladies than the spider in your lake. So if you have really mastered the dance of a lake in Ottawa, and you really are a lady killer, and I pick you up and I drop you in a lake in Ohio with the same species of spiders, you'll do your dance, and you know you're so good at it that you will strike pay dirt with the girls. And they'll look at you and go, who the hell are you? What the hell is that you're doing? I don't want to have anything to do with you. And they'll turn their back on you because the two different lakes have developed a different style of dancing. Now, that means that each lake is going to have a different style of which sort of male is worth mating with. That means if each lake is going to take off in a different direction genetically. Now, we humans are better, spiders are good at this cultural differentiation that leads to genetic differentiation. And guppies are good at this cultural differentiation that leads to genetic differentiation. And I'll tell you how good guppies are in a second. But we humans are really good at it. We are really good at manufacturing entirely new subcultures with new definitions of what's beautiful and what's ugly that then take off in new genetic directions. Now, we've been living in cities for 10,000 years, and if we use the gradualist approach of Darwin, and it takes millions of years to make an evolutionary change, to create an evolutionary innovation, then no way in hell have cities influenced us. We were influenced as the folks in evolutionary biology who I rebel against all the time. We were influenced by the era of evolutionary adaptiveness. We were influenced by our days as hunter-gatherers because we were hunter-gathering for 2.5 million years before we became modern us. That's all we were influenced by, say these people. They're wrong. We've been around for 10,000 years in cities, and those who do best in cities have done best at getting the girls. We've been evolving large-scale social structures since the first empires evolved, approximately, well, actually, the Egyptian Empire was approximately 7,000 years ago, since big and complex empires began to establish themselves. If you were going to be a pharaoh, you had to know how to run you had to be well adapted to running a big and complex empire. You had to have the kinds of moral instincts, the kinds of intelligence, and the kinds of emotions that it took to knit together a big empire and do well with it. In fact, you had to prove yourself. In this book, 1177 BC, that I'm now reading, it points out that, it doesn't point it out, it just says, the Egyptian king, who's the emperor of the biggest empire around, is saying, the following kings are my brothers. In other words, they're my relative equals on my scale. And he lists kings of about 5 different empires around him, the Hittites, the Assyrians, a few others. And one of them, he lists, because what we've got is a draft document, and apparently it's on clay. And one of the kings in the neighborhood is on the list, and then he's scratched out. Somebody hasn't made the cut this year. Somebody was on the list of the big kings last year, but he's not on the list this year. So it's a competitive business to stay high on that list. Now, how do you prove that you belong on that list? Well, when you start your kingship, judging from the evidence in this book, it looks like when you start your kingship, you better go out there and find some other group that you can beat the shit out of, because you're going to be measured by the extent of your victories. Now, to be victorious in a war where you are having large-scale social groups with chariots and spear throwers and slingers, because there were bullets around at the time. You know what they were used for? There were no guns. They were used for the slingers, because that slingshot stuff that you see in demonstrations in the Middle East, that's murderous. That's there to kill people. So in those days, you had to know how to operate your armies of slingers. You had to know how to operate your armies of archers. You had to know how to mobilize your troops of charioteers. And you had to be able to use this to outfox the guy on the other side and his team, who were trained for years, just like your soldiers were trained for years in certain basic battle skills. And if you didn't cut it on the battlefield, if you lost that first battle that you were going to use to establish just how high and mighty you were and that you belonged on the list of the top kings made by the Egyptian, you're out. What does that mean? You're dead. How many children does that mean you'll have? None. And if you win, hey, you get wives, you get concubines, you get all kinds of things. You really get to shoot your genes through the next generation. But you have to prove your ability to work with large-scale organization. War is all about that. It's all about that, your ability to work with large-scale organization. So we humans have been crafting genes to fit the demands of large-scale organization for 7,000 years. And guess what? All the new evidence coming in indicates 7,000 years is plenty of time in which to make massive, massive genetic change, especially using cultural differentiation. The Egyptian standard of beauty, very different from the Greek standard of beauty. Very different from the Hittite standard of beauty. Very different from the Hebrew standard of beauty. The Hebrew standard of beauty has put a premium on reading, writing, and using language for a very long time. Remember, in the Bible, we have two creation myths. One creation myth, and they're both creation myths about technology. And in one creation myth, God uses the technology of the Babylonians, making things out of mud, making units of mud into bricks. He makes man from mud. And the other technology is the technology of a sheep herding people. Sheep herders don't bother to make things from mud because things that you make from mud are very heavy and it's hard to carry them around, and they have to carry everything that they have around. So everything has to be as lightweight as possible. Well, guess what weighs nothing to carry around? Absolutely zero to carry around. Words. So what's the second creation myth in the Bible? Another technology. God says, let there be light. And there was light. God speaks the universe into existence. How much does talking weigh? Nothing. It's really portable stuff. So we Jews have focused on the word and the speaking and the book for a very long time. The book was invented in Byblos in approximately 800 BC. It didn't really catch on until the 3rd century. Plato was still raving against the book as a hot new technology that was going to attract kids and was going to destroy their minds because they wouldn't have to memorize entire books anymore. And that was approximately 400 BC when he was raving about that. We Jews picked up on the book early, and we made the book a basic to our way of life. So Jewish kids, Jewish mothers, young, attractive, nubile Jewish girls with high breasts and tiny little waists and tiny little narrow, slender torsos and nice hips. What do they look for? They look for doctors. They look for lawyers. They look for people with brains, right? Black women advertising in chocolate singles in the 1970s looked for something very different. There were tons of personal ads from women. Tons. There were almost no personal ads from men. And the personal ads from women started with the same words, every single one of them. Must be over 6'1". So what are they breeding for? Self-selecting for is the term that's used in evolutionary biology. Height. Is there anything in there about brains? Not in the first 4 words. And the first 4 words are pretty definitive. So different subcultures choose different ways of breeding themselves genetically, changing themselves physically, which could help explain why some of us are golden, the people of Asia. I mean, I just am stunned by the golden skin of the Asian girls at the tea lounge from time to time. There are a lot of different skin colors, but they tend to be a little bit more on the golden side. And we tend to be a little more on the white and rosy side, and blacks, of course, tend to be a little bit more on the black side. And I can't even define what the characteristics are of the Arab friends that I have. This is Terry Jean Rosenberg. Let me apologize to her. I apologize, I didn't get to call you today, and we're in the middle of taping. The camera's on, Gio is rolling. He's convinced that we have such a laughably turbulent relationship that it makes comedy. So how are you? Gio, he's just absolutely, I keep telling him our relationship is remarkably stable. So how are you? Because I can't spend a lot of time on the phone. He's taping. Yes, dear, every relationship is turbulent. Haven't you noticed? That was wonderful. So how are you doing? How's your leg? DMSO. It's worth trying DMSO, dear. Well, you can't tell until you try it. You can't tell until, no, it won't get you to the hospital. There's no way that will happen. It just won't happen. It doesn't produce anaphylactic shock. It doesn't produce allergic reactions. It does produce skin irritation, but not that kind of reaction at all. It's worth trying. But what, if you don't want to, I can't force you. I just want you to be better. How else are you going to get up the stairs here? Well, okay, well, I should go back to Gio. He's rolling the whole time. He's rolling. I'm looking directly into the lens of the camera right now. And I will try to call you tonight because I'll, finish my meeting tonight of the Big Bang Tango Media Lab at midnight, and I'll try to go out in the park and I'll call you. Okay? Okay, bye, dearest. Now, don't laugh. Terry said, Gio is saying our relationship is turbulent? Like, how could he possibly say that? Our relationship isn't turbulent. No. Well, I thought the relationship was over on Friday. What did I know? So at any rate, but as I said, that's normal. Relationships are hard. I ran into my friend, I kept forgetting her name yesterday, Michelle yesterday. Michelle is tall, blonde, no, she's tall and black. She's not blonde. She is tall and black, and she has, up until this year, up until the last time I saw her, she had the most amazing little tiny waist. It's just beginning to fill out now. But when Mark Slauer, who's making Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me, the movie about my rock and roll years, and the movie that says that every form of human interchange you have is an interchange of human spirit, it's an interchange of human soul. And be aware of that or you're in trouble. Okay, that's what that film says. And nurture that soul or you're in trouble. Why is this blinking?
Because I've got 3 minutes on this.
Yeah, okay, so Mark was there, and when he saw Michelle, he was absolutely stunned. So Michelle has had one of the most stable relationships I've known of, especially in the black community, because relationships there are much tougher than the relationships that you and I endure. And she has 2 kids, and they're wonder kids. And she's a Wonder Woman. She's on her way to her PhD, although she's been on her way to her PhD for a long time. She's an assistant professor now. She wasn't when I first met her. She was a student. She's terrific, brainy as can be. And when Mark saw her, he was floored. He said, he sent me an email while I was sitting there. That woman practically sitting on your lap, he said, is gorgeous. Okay, so what's the nature of her relationship? Her husband was out of work for 18 months. They separated. She has a boyfriend. She's trying to maintain both her former husband and the father of her kids and her boyfriend, and she's trying to make them friends, basically, and her husband is having none of it, absolutely none of it. She thinks she's doing something good. He thinks that she's doing this to punish him and torture him. Does it sound anything like a normal human relationship to you? It's perfectly normal. It's what we all go through. It's just that romantic comedies are built to show us what we would like relationships to be, and that isn't what relationships to be. And they are kind enough to cut it off at a certain point before all the trouble begins and say, and they lived happily ever after. Bullshit. That's where the trouble begins. That's where it begins. There was a woman on TV who was married to Bob Morgenthau. Bob Morgenthau came from a very important Jewish family. It's a family that's always been around power, major power. And Bob Morgenthau was a district attorney here, and somehow, even though she was 30 years younger than he was, and she was a hippie, and she was part of the anti-war movement, and he was the establishment, they fell in love, and they ended up getting married. Well, you should hear her talk about the difficulties, the years when they couldn't even talk to each other, and yet she thinks it's the most wonderful relationship anyone could possibly have in their life. And there were years, entire years, when they had a difficulty even talking to each other. But they made it through those years. That was what was important. And they made it anyway through those years. And you have to do that, and I have to do that. I did it for 32 years with my first wife. I've done it for 6 years with Terry. And it's paid off. I mean, I was miserable because Terry couldn't come on Friday night, but look what I did. All that work with these films. I had an intensely necessary time. It couldn't have happened more fortuitously if I had chosen it and mapped it out. But there's a phrase from, of all people, Hillary Clinton. And it basically says, wherever you are, make that what you must be. Now, I've badly paraphrased it, but that's it. And that's the secret to turning an illness into a blessing.